Good afternoon. It is 4 p.m. in London. I am Keston Perry, and this is episode 2 of True Talk, where we are not afraid to put water in our mouth to deal with the issues, the economic and political issues, social issues as well, of the day in Trinidad and Tobago and internationally. I started the last episode talking specifically about the midterm review. Since then, it's been 1 week since the Finance Minister, Colm Imbert, presented his mid-year review to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to deal with some of the comments he has made in the media since that review was presented. First off, let's deal with the issue of what Mr. Imbert has referred to as a free enterprise system and a free enterprise economy. Basically, it means that government has little control, or decides rather, to allow businesses to operate as freely as possible and to set market prices and to set prices on goods and services and to allow businesses to operate as they should, or in their minds, as policymakers and as some of the business lobbies would tell you, they should operate. First off, the issue of a free market economy or free market enterprise system it started back in the late 70s when Chile, under the authoritarian regime of Pinochet, introduced a lot of measures to try to, what they thought was to curb the amount of influence that the state had in the economy, because they believed that many of the policies, mainly industrial policies of the 60s and the 70s, were bad for the economy, and it ushered in, it brought in a time of serious instability and decline in the economies of Latin America. It happened throughout Africa. It happened in Asia. In Trinidad and Tobago, our free enterprise system, if you want to put it that way, started in the mid-1980s after the globe was going through a debt crisis, and many developing countries were facing serious debt and serious problems. Let me put two ideas on the table. One, the debt crisis was not necessarily as a result of objective decline in the economies of Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, or Asia. These were issues and these were decisions taken at the IMF, at the World Bank, to not allow countries to continue basically deficit spending. That is the issue. The issue was that these international organizations decided that, and creditors of these countries decided that we needed to not allow these countries to engage in deficit spending. Let me tell you why this is, in particular, is a fallacy. The US government has a deficit of trillions of dollars. The US government owes, its main debtor is China. And the economy is still known as one of the most prosperous in the world. China presently operates on a different system, but it has grown at a rate of 7.5% over the last 15 years and more. And so the idea of deficit spending, which is one of the principles of free market economics, is bad, has less to do with objective economic policy and more to do with power. I'll come back to the issue of power in a minute. So the minister has said that we need to allow the market to set prices. We need to allow companies to do as they please and basically run things. That is not. It's not a new it's not a new decision. It's not a new way of doing things in Trinidad and Tobago. In the late 50s, under Dr. Eric Williams, when he was chief minister at the time before he became prime minister in 1962. The position at that time and the policy was that all the government would do is engage in basic types of activities, such as setting up institutions, such as giving millions of dollars. I think it was up to about $250 million of dollars spent in incentives to the private sector. That's from 1958 to 1962. And all government was meant to do was to sit by and allow the private sector to operate and to engage in new manufacturing activities and engage in new kinds of economic activity. This did not work. And coming down to the end of the 60s, it was realized that if you allow companies to operate as they should, they are not going to direct resources to areas of new economic activity. They are not going to engage in risky investments, largely because that in the first few years that they engage in those activities, they're not going to make a profit. And because those investments are untested, because no one is currently producing those kinds of goods and services, it is unlikely that they're going to recoup their investments in a short period of time. And business, unless there's government intervention, business's main objective is profit making. It is not economic growth. It is not development. It's not economic development. The issue was recognized in the late 60s that the government needed to take a much more active role in the economy. And during the 70s, a number of companies were nationalized. The government spearheaded a number of task forces to introduce monetized natural gas and to engage in iron and steel production and so on. And that's when we had the Iron and Steel Company, which later became ArcelorMittal. So I'll get to that, the issue of free market economics and how that affected ArcelorMittal and its decision to file for insolvency, as well as Coleco. The government has decided that it would, on its own volition, and I suppose, and I presume rather, that this is upon the advice of Dr. Terence Farrell and his team, that they are going to cut the fuel subsidy. And the reasons he's given in his mid-year review report is that it causes traffic, it causes congestion, it causes pollution, damage to roads, and environmental degradation. I want to offer an alternative view. The issue of the fuel subsidy has an effect certainly on the environment. And because of the fact that the major commodity that is produced in Trinidad and Tobago come from the energy sector through petrochemicals and hydrocarbons, there's a view, and it is my view, that the country and the citizens need and should benefit from the patrimony of the energy sector. And they should, to no small extent, be able to have services, public services and government services that meet their needs. Many people without without government is unable to put food on the table, the cost of transportation would be extremely high, and the cost of other services, including, we're talking about education, we're talking about health, would be out of reach of the average citizen. The issue with the fuel subsidy, and the reason that the economy is linked back to the policies in the late 50s and the policies that were taken from the early 90s when the NAR was in government to the present time. Those what I've called are free market policies. Since then, since the 90s in particular, the government took the decision that it was removing itself based on the advice and based on rather the instruction of the IMF and the World Bank, which when the government entered into a structural adjustment program, that it is going to pull back out of the economy, allow markets to operate, allow competition and so on. And as a result, we have not seen private sector investment in a number of new areas in the economy. In technology, we have not seen it. We have not seen it in microelectronics. We have not seen it in a number of areas, even food, in the marine sector. These are areas that were targeted by the government for diversification since the early 90s. And the reason is because there's a contradiction. When you remove regulations, when you remove certain types of stringent measures from the economy, basically the private sector is going to react. And it's going to react by ensuring that it invests in areas where it's going to recoup its profits at a very short rate, at a very short period of time. And it's going to ensure that basically its prices are so high that it's going to get the maximum amount of profit from producing or offering those goods and services. That's a basic principle. That it's called market failure. It is not going to invest in new industries, especially when the government decides to not regulate how the private enterprise does what it does. The issue, in addition, it is linked to the fuel subsidy issue, and it's linked to the fact that the economy does not generate income from other aspects of economic activity that have huge growth potential throughout the world. It's also the reason why countries such as China has been able to outpace countries in Latin America to a great extent and build up its manufacturing sector to a huge extent, and it has outpaced even the United States in terms of manufacturing activity. So the issue about a free enterprise economy having the best or being the best alternative to government intervention has proven time and time again to not be a fact. It's also what led to the Asian crisis in the late 90s, where many countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and many countries in that part of the world were affected by a huge economic crisis and a huge financial crisis. Because basically the government, because at the time the policy was that government would not would only provide certain basic services like health and education and would not invest in economic activity. So in our case, in Trinidad and Tobago, this has been the problem since the early 1990s. It was a problem that happened very early on in our history, from the late 50s to about the late 1960s, until the government decided that it's going to do more in the economy. And perhaps it did a bit too much and really caused serious problems in the early 80s, when we just were out of cash, as we are presently, and we needed to do something differently, and that's what brought in certain free market policies. There is a distinction, however, that government can invest in certain areas, as we've seen with Point Lisas, we've seen with First Citizens Bank, and we've also seen with a number, Unit Trust Corporation, the National Gas Corporation. Many of these companies, despite its recent challenges and difficulties, have been a product of government intervention and has created downstream activity in the natural gas sector and in urea, methanol, and ammonia, and so on. The problem has been government has stepped back and has not been able to challenge, to a large extent, many of the private sector interests that just want to make a profit and don't invest in new areas. That is the end of episode 2. I hope you would watch, and the next occasion I will deal with some of the issues that we are presently facing, a number of issues that have come up, especially with the 7% increase in the proposed 7% increase in the online tax. Thank you very much and take care.